Have you ever heard the story of Ronald Read, the man who was able to save more than $8 million during his lifetime? After his death in 2014, the whole world was shocked. Why? There are a ton of millionaires that are created every year, would you ask me? Well, Ronald was an average middle-class man his entire life, which makes his story unbelievable. Ronald spent most of his time as a janitor, which paid him around $12 an hour. But how can someone who earns as little as $12 an hour save such an amount of money? Well, that's what we'll see in this video by following Ronald in his journey to financial stability. The reason Ronald was able to achieve such wealth was because of his diligence and his knowledge of the wealth formula. Indeed, the true definition of wealth is not how much money you can make, but how much money you have. Slight difference here, but you will understand after my explanation. Indeed, your cash flow is defined by the money coming in your bank account. So how much money do you make? Minus the money going out, your expenses, which equal your cash flow. That is how much money you have in the end. This is pure logic, but many seem not to understand the logic because it is not taught in school. In the book, The Psychology of Money, Morgan Housel writes that true wealth is actually the money that you have not spent yet. If the number is positive, you have money left over. But if the number is negative, you are in debt. That's why someone with a $250,000 a year salary can fall into debt. Because if his expenses are more than $250,000 a year, then he's under debt. In the book Rich Dad, Poor Dad by Robert Kiyosaki, explains this concept by classing everything into a graph like this one. Why most people are not able to retire comfortably is mainly because they are falling into this graph. You see, that's what the flow of cash of a non-wealthy person looks like. The money coming from only one source of income, which is their job, is then followed directly by his expenses, which is everything you need to survive on a daily basis like rent, insurance, food, or bills, and after that, they're going to pay or buy liabilities like credit cards, their car, etc. If you recognize yourself in this formula, listen carefully for the next minute, because you will need to learn one thing from this video if you want to improve your financial situation. On the other hand, this is the flow of cash from a wealthy person, which is different from the poor. It is not paying expenses first, that is the problem, because everyone has them. But after paying expenses, their mentality is different from the poor. Other than paying for things that are not going to make them money in the longer term, like liabilities, they focus on putting their money in a place where it can compound and make them even more money. The assets section. That's a section that we are going to analyze in the next chapter of this video. What's the difference between an asset and a liability, would you ask me? Well, after the money of a non-wealthy person has passed into the liability section, these liabilities then become expenses, which obligate the non-wealthy to repeat the loop infinitely. Work more to pay more expenses to then create more liabilities to pay on, and so on. On the other hand, the money put in this asset section of the wealthy person reduces the amount of their expenses that they are paying because these assets would then on create them money so that they can be progressively more financially free. That's why the rich get richer and the poor gets poorer. Ronald understood that, and even if he had a very low salary, he was able to make his expenses worth less than his income to assure that he always had money left over to save and invest to assure himself a peaceful retirement. If you are interested in this mentality that Robert Kiyosaki explains in his book, a video will appear at the end of this video that explains the most important lessons of this book, including how the rich get richer, so feel free to watch it after this one. Ronald established daily little habits that could save him a lot of money on a long-term perspective, like living in the same house from 38 years old until his death, or walking to his job to save cash in gas. Mr. Read understood the value of money, and he reflected it by reducing his expenses as much as possible to have the most money possible left in his pocket. But if you do the math, if Read worked for 17 years as a janitor with a salary of $12 an hour and also worked as a gas station attendant for 25 years for about the same salary, you would end up with about $1.2 million and that without any expenses. So how was he able to stand out from the every middle class person and ended up being a multi-millionaire? Well, that's where the step 2 of Ronald Read plan takes place. But before we move into the next step, if you enjoyed this video or have learned anything since the beginning of it, make sure to subscribe to this channel because we upload many videos on topics like finance, investing, or making money. So please consider subscribing if these subjects talk to you. Now, back to the video. His secret is simple, but not easy to execute. Indeed, it is his discipline that made him stand out from the crowd. With the money he used to keep aside after paying his expenses, Ronald took a percentage of that amount and invested it on a regular basis in dividend shares, which made his money grow exponentially in the longer run. That's exactly the flow of cash of wealthy people that I showed previously. Putting money in dividend stocks instead of putting it in various other options is like prioritizing assets before liabilities. Ronald understood that perfectly. He claimed that he only invested in blue chip companies. That is to say, reliable companies that have proven to have a good history of profitability throughout their existence, even in the more difficult times. Ronald also claimed that he avoided all technology companies because, according to him, variation in this kind of actions can very quickly affect his long-term plan. As he mentioned earlier, Ronald also decides his stocks based on the dividend rate that each company divides among their investors. With this amount of money that he receives from those companies, he can reinvest it to grow an even bigger portfolio. This concept is called compound interest or the snowball effect. Let's put this concept into perspective. Let's say that you're 25 years old and start investing with $1,000 in the first place, and each month you add $250, which is pretty realistic for a person with a fairly low salary, and then place it in an index fund that follows the 500 best performing stocks on the stock market, the S&P 500. Well, after 10 years, your investments will be worth $60,191, which is not quite $1 million yet, but that is where the magic happens. Indeed, even after 20 years, your portfolio would be worth $254,437. And if you decide to withdraw them for retirement at around age 65, the initial $1,000 investment would be worth $2.96 million. Now we're talking. This calculation does not even include Ronald's dividend strategy, which allowed him to reinvest the amount of money that the companies offering dividends gave him in each quarter. There are several ways to improve your results with this strategy. Indeed, if your financial situation allows it, then you can decide to put $50 or even $100 more, which would bring your initial investment at age 65 to $3.53 million with $50 more per month or $4.1 million with an extra $100 a month. We see that this can quickly increase. But one mistake that many investors seem to make more and more nowadays is to look for quick results by selling your shares and not following your original investment plan. Despite it being a small amount of your most important asset, with your investments is time, and that's what brings us to this next chapter. Like mentioned earlier, time is your most precious asset when it comes to investing. That's why most profitable investor on this planet was able to achieve such wealth. Because Warren Buffett started to invest as soon as he was 10 years old. He understood at a very young age that time will make your investing plan worth extremely more. That's why at only 30 years old, he became a millionaire, and today, Warren Buffett is worth $115 billion. If we look at this graph showing his wealth over time, we can clearly see that starting to invest young was the key to his fortune. The more time you will let your money compound, the more it'll make you in return, which you can reinvest, and the wheel starts over and over. Time is so effective when it comes to investing because that's where all the magic of compound interest enters the game. What his story tells us? Well, even if you have a poor education or a low-paying job, there's always a route to become financially free. The conclusion that we need to make from this story is not matter how much you make. You can always find a way to reduce your expenses so that you have money left over and can invest it on a monthly or a weekly basis. His investment strategy can be replicated from every financial stage you're in. So, if Ronald was able to create $8 million with a $12 an hour salary, there are endless possibilities to make way more than what he did with changing time as your most precious asset. But it's never too late to start. Ronald's story proves to us that even with the lowest financial situation that you can be in, there is always a way to break free from the cycle of poverty. If you enjoyed this type of video, don't forget to subscribe to the channel to be noticed by every video that we release. Thank you for watching till the end, and there is the video about the most important lessons of Robert Kiyosaki in his books, Rich Dad, Poor Dad.